Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome to Laguna Art Museum. My name is Julie Perlin-Lee, and I'm the executive director here. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this conversation with Fred Tomaselli. We're celebrating his exhibition, Second Nature, which we welcomed in last night. So many of you were here. Thank you for that. Before we get started, I just wanted to recognize there are so many of you here that made today possible, including my incredible board of trustees. Thank you very much for being here. Lenders and sponsors and project managers and galleries and a whole wonderful ecosystem around Fred that has made this all possible. And I especially want to say thank you to Rochelle Steiner, who will join me on stage or take the stage in a moment, for curating this incredible exhibition, as well as the exhibition Trees by Jay DeFeo in the adjacent gallery. So to pull off two exhibitions in a very small timeline is just incredible. So thank you, Rochelle. Thank you so much, Julie, for the introduction, and thank you, Fred, for being here with us. And thank you, all of you, for coming out here on Sunday to join us today. I want to also welcome the Tomaselli family and extended family. There are a lot of you here. And I am really appreciative of everybody who traveled from far and wide. We have people from Southern California. We have people from the Pacific Northwest. We have people from New York. We have people from London who have come to join us and elsewhere. But thank you so much, because Fred has a lot of fans. I want to also thank the Laguna Art Museum team, who have worked tirelessly to pull off two exhibitions, one catalog so far for the Jay DeFeo show, and soon we will also have a catalog with this show. Barbara Glauber, who is seated here in blue and brown, is designing that with me and Fred, and so thank you, Barbara. Stay tuned for the book. All right, so now to Fred. Fred, as you well know, loves California, and California loves Fred. So here we are to celebrate his homecoming, so to speak. Since 1985, though, Fred has been living in New York and has been totally ensconced in life and times of New York. And I just want to mention that next time you are there, Fred also, as if he's not busy enough, will be installing a subway project at 14th Street, which when he goes home next week, we'll jump right into that project. So he hasn't just been doing this, he has also been doing 10 other things in the midst of this. So Fred, thank you so much for taking my daily phone calls, text, emails, and everything else to get this on the walls. But this show really is a homecoming. Fred grew up in this area, went to school in this area, was formed by this area, and he's going to talk about that today. One of the things that we did in this exhibition was really want to highlight how California is an ongoing thread in the work, even though he does work since 1985 from New York, and issues that we deal with globally, but specifically on the sharp end here, having to do with the coast, having to do with the environment, having to do with animals, and fire, and all kinds of other issues that are the result of climate change. We see a piece right in the back that talks about climate change and records being broken, and here we are breaking them again. So this show feels extremely relevant. All this work has been made within the last 20 years, and there is a sweet spot also since COVID. So this is a moment to kind of look at what we've been through recently, and to see how this has affected artistic practice, also very positively in what we have on the walls. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred, and he is going to make you so happy as we have been these last weeks looking at this work. So, Fred.
Hi. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Rochelle, for all the hard work that you've done on my behalf. Thank you, Julie, for having me in your wonderful museum. I'd also like to thank White Cube, my gallery in London, and James Cohn, my gallery in New York, for helping to facilitate these very complex loan procurements to get into this show. And I'd also like to thank my family, Desi and Laura, and my brothers and sisters who all came from far and wide. And I'd also like to thank Barbara Glauber, who's doing a great job on my catalog. I'll only use Barbara. So anyway, and thank you, Laguna Beach, because it's really cool to be here. So I was told that I have to be kind of short. I usually start with theme parks. I grew up pretty close to Disneyland. I was used to seeing a little tiny version of Tinkerbell flying on the night sky amid the fireworks. I thought that was normal. I had to move to New York before I found out that it's not exactly what everybody else in America is going through. But this, my relationship to this culture of Southern California dislocation and the idea of the kind of this reality dislocation that we all kind of lived in, and in my particular case, being a stoner in Orange County, which is like a hippie without ideology. It's, you know, that was sort of my 70s sort of bled into my consciousness. And so I guess a lot of my work sort of comes from that position. So I'm not going to go with all the installations that I had done prior to my work that I'm known for now. I'm just going to start with this work here, which I was thinking about. I had abandoned paintings for like 5 years and then gone and done installation and performance work. And I was working mostly in and around downtown Los Angeles. And I had moved to New York. I had been mugged and spent some time in the hospital recovering. My friends were dying of AIDS. The city was kind of plagued by this crack and crime epidemic. And I was told in art school that the worst thing that artwork could be was an escapist vehicle, and that art had to be about truth. And I was thinking, like, well, you know, maybe escapism is like the dominant kind of, you know, cultural issue of our time. At that particular point, you know, Ronald Reagan was president, and that seemed like a real meta situation where the actor was portraying a president and everybody was buying it. I didn't think it was getting any weirder than that. Little did I know. So, and but I sort of thought that like this whole our whole culture of dislocated reality was kind of not just responsible for the shape I was in, but responsible for the shape we were in. So I started thinking about those ideas, those issues about paintings as escapist vehicles, and I started thinking, well, okay, it's kind of interesting. Like, I want to make work that is about, in a very self-conscious way, about the mechanics of escapism and the idea of a painting as a transportation vehicle to take you to other dimensions. I loved paintings. I loved, you know, to look at a Vermeer is to be transported back in time and into this, you know, a world of perfect peace and harmony. And I just thought, I need to try to get to that, but in my own way. So because I had a background in the garage, a lot of my aesthetics come out of the garage. One of the aesthetics that I developed here growing up in Southern California was surfboard shaping. And so, and I knew about, you know, I knew how to resin, and I knew how to work with all these materials. And so so this is an early work from 1990 called Big As Me. And what it is it's my homage to Bruce Nauman, an artist who's very important to me, whose work I saw at LACMA as retrospective. I think it was in 1974. It really kind of changed my perspective of what art could be. And one of the things that Nauman did was that all the work came out of his body at that particular moment, and it was kind of filled with dark humor and phenomenological tricks. And so this work here is a spinal cord, this as tall as myself, that's made out of aspirin, acetaminophen and saccharin, so it's like a little spinal cord. It's very minimal, but it's sort of getting to the ideas that I had around my work. And I was thinking at the time that looking at these drugs that were embedded in the surface of this work, and it's covered with resin, I should say that, like a surfboard. So it's like routed out, little slots routed out, and then the pills are packed inside, and then they're covered with resin, like the work that you see here, more or less. And I was thinking at the time that looking at, that you could use the pills in a different way. Instead of going through the bloodstream to alter consciousness, they travel through the eyeballs. So it's just a different way to altering perception. And that became a sort of, foundational idea that the rest of the work kind of built off of. So this is like my palette at the time. I don't use drugs in my work anymore, pills in my work anymore, but I still have plenty of this. They were sorted according to genus, species, size, and color. And we might get to me and my birding and taxonomy if we have time. But anyway, so then I started thinking about, I'm putting it, so I did a variety of works in and around using pills, pharmaceutical pills. And then I started thinking I needed to put something in my work that kind of alludes to drug subcultures and or illicit subculture, the culture of pleasure, not just medicine. So I started growing pot, which one does when one is from California, and which I started in Cal State Fullerton on Amherst Street. That's another story. And so I restarted my pot grow in New York. This is like 1992, and this is a piece called X Will Fade. And I knew the leaves would fade over time, given that their exposure to ultraviolet light would change them to gold. So I should say that that X, what I did was I painted all the leaves the same color they were in real life, and they stabilized, they stayed the same, but the X came out of the piece over time. So this was a photograph of the piece, like 15 years after I made it. So I was using sunlight as a studio assistant in that work. And so anyway, and it's also maybe an homage to Frank Stella and some of the hard abstractionists. Now I was working very specifically in, using the tropes of minimalism in my work, but I was also a painter. I had been a painter. I had a background in, I was doing photorealistic work in college. I had gone through an expressionistic phase. I put out zines. I had some chops, but they all were atrophying while I was investigating new media. And so slowly you'll see that my painterly, technical skills or whatever, slowly start coming back into the work over time. And I think actually I'm now a painter, not something I was willing to admit even 10 years ago. But anyway, so this is my garden in my backyard in Brooklyn. A lot of the leaves that you see in the work here, I have a lot of leaves in the work. Some of them are psychoactive, but many of them are not. Roses, the roses and datura and cannabis and, dahlia. And so anyway, what I do is this is my datura. I got the seed pod from in front of George O'Keeffe's house in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and I've been growing in Brooklyn ever since. It's a psychoactive hallucinogen that puts you it's in the principalities of darkness. Apparently, I do not recommend it. I've never tried it, but you will be with Satan. So what I do is I make these plant presses like an 18th century botanist, and then I take the leaves after they've been dried and flattened, put them into loose leaf binders, and then I can use them in a very intuitive way. And so this is a work that I was super embarrassed about for a while, but it kind of pointed the way forward. I had been working in geometric minimalism, and this was extremely, in my opinion, maybe overly decorative or suspiciously decorative. And it's a piece called Superplant. And what I was doing was sort of I have a long love affair with Rajasthani miniatures from India, and also with American folk art. So the foliage that one sees in Rajasthani miniatures and the tree of life that one sees in the Shaker quilts were sort of hybridized in this work, but this also is a hybridization of different plant material. If the piece itself was made out of ephedra, which I gathered in the desert, which is the basis of ephedrine, which is the basis of methamphetamine. There's the yellow circles are tobacco leaves. The little dots inside those circles are morning glory seeds, which contain an indole related to LSD. The little pink dots house magic mushrooms, and then you see the hemp leaves. So, and there's coffee beans. So the reason I call it super plant is if it ever lived, it would rule the world. But anyway, I also added the blue flowers, and it was because it really needed something else, and that's when the thing began to retinally pop for me, and I think that really really pointed the way forward towards where my work would evolve. And I was so, nervous about this. I actually hid it for a number of months and just kept pulling out, going, I don't know. And but it was really important. I think that's what has happened to me generally as an artist is I almost have to embarrass myself in the studio and, take that leap and then to get to another place. So, this is, so now I'm starting to add collage elements to my work. These are images of birds that I cut out of field guides, images of plants that I also cut out of field guides. Sometimes I get them off the internet. I pre-cut them, put them on sticky paper, and then again I can use them intuitively and arrange them in these tables all over my studio and assemble my work in a more kind of free associative way. What I liked about the addition of photographic imagery to my work is that I had added paint. There were already real things, and now there's photographic things. So this relationship between what is real, what is depicted photographically, and what is painted painterly sometimes becomes a little hard to parse. And I feel like that kind of positions itself really well around my idea about reality and perception. So this is so a lot of the works I was doing were like I still have vestigial sculptural ideas in my work. There is dimension. If one sees these works in real life, one can see shadow play and dimensionality. So there's this vestigial relief. They're flat, but there's a relief kind of dimensionality. And in some of these works, there are also, in at least the earliest works, there's like vestigial performances that, private performances that I'm doing. Like in this work here, I was living upstate New York, which is really buggy, and I was working in a garage close to a creek, and the creek had all these insects that were rising up out of the water every night, and they would land and stick in my resin and screw up my work. And so I was like, okay, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And so what I did was I took the canvases, or the panels, they're like, 5 by 7 feet each. I brought them out into the middle of a meadow, aimed giant lights at them, and then this storm of bugs came over the work, and then they were just flying around, and then I poured my epoxy resin onto the surface, turning it into a giant glue trap, and the bugs died in random formations, thereby sort of depicting this collision between nature and technology, and maybe, if you will, a portrait of the night sky at that particular moment. I sort of froze that moment. And that was a yellow canvas, and so 2 yellow canvases. And then what I did was I cut in black, outlined some of the bugs I wanted to keep, created hybrid bugs. Do I have a detail? Yeah, created hybrid bugs of paint. And then in this case, I created a cadaver form out of an anatomical illustration book. And in the narrative in this is inverted insofar as instead of me killing the bugs, they're now hatching out of this cadaver like a tarantula wasp out of the host tarantula after eating its victim. I'm sorry, it's a little macabre, but nature's like that. And then I painted the grass and stuff. So it's you can see like paint has started to come back into the work. I think this was made around 1996 or something. So this is another work I did. It's a private performance piece. This is called Dermal Delivery, or How I Quit Smoking. And so what I did was, I don't have a detail, but and I don't know what you can see all the way in the back of the room, but let me describe it to you. It's a little grid of flesh-colored squares, and many of the flesh-colored squares are nicotine patches I was wearing on my body. And I would rip them off every day, stick them on the piece, and then not do a whole lot because I was quitting smoking, and I was freaking out. And then what I did was I got little snippets, little grids of skin, of flesh from magazines, and inserted them, put some Band-Aids on, put some nitroglycerin patches on there. And basically, it was all about like paint as skin, which is a whole thing that you learn about when you're in art school, and oil paint and all that. And it became the portrait of me trying to quit smoking. And then I started smoking again at the opening, and it was a whole thing. But anyway, around 19, so I started thinking about this idea of like paintings as windows to other worlds. What kind of world do I want to take you to? So I started like depicting some of my favorite places. This is a piece called I think it's called Desert Incident, Ocotillo Nocturne. Sorry, and what it is the landscape behind it. Is if you were able to see it, was kind of an ocotillo in the background, and the silhouettes are the 6 major succulents of the Joshua Tree National Park. And I wanted you to see this landscape through this scrim of other information. Because for me, I would love to be a Hudson River School painter. That's my jam. I really like that. Thomas Cole and Frederick Church and those people, Bierstadt. But for me, landscape is really loaded. It's loaded with socio-political boundaries, water rights issues, the genocide of Native American and slavery, and utopian ideology. And so I wanted you to see this, see this landscape, which I really love, and I wanted to transport you to that landscape, but you're seeing it through a scrim of arabesque imagery. And so I was kind of very involved with landscape for a while. This one's called Double Landscape, and the swirling psychedelic style background around the Tondo imagery of the landscape is topographical information in and around Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the painting in the center is the same landscape depicted from photographic imagery I painted from a photograph of the Jemez mountain range. So it was a different way of utilizing ideas about landscape, and then the little dots are little saccharin tablets. I don't know what that's about, but so this is one of my largest works I ever made, called Gravity's Rainbow, based on the Thomas Pynchon novel of the same name. And it was more or less predicated on ideas that Sol LeWitt talked about in his Notes on Conceptualism, where he talks about, the brain, like the mind is the machine that makes the art, and then our hands just merely act it out. And in this case, what I did was, I think I have, here's a detail. What I did was I found all these, I took these catenaries, which are these, these arches, and what I did was I took one of those pull chains that you pull on and off light switch with, and I made an 18-foot pull chain, and I just pinned it and just traced the catenaries, and it just built up over time. It was like once I set it up, it was almost like a computer program, and I just kept building this thing over time. Adding in, there's real pills, there's dots that have been painted, there's photographic imagery, there's these necklaces of body parts, and which we might get to in a little while about where that came from, leaves, and anyways, it's Gravity's Rainbow. And then this is me working on the floor. Usually this is how I build the pieces. This is for the art students in the room. I often work on my hands and knees on the floor, arranging stuff, looking at it from a ladder, getting down off the ladder, using a bridge to get over to the center of the work, gluing it all down, then getting it up on the wall. So this is like 2 panels on the wall, a third one on the, one on the wall, 2 on the floor. That was a 3-panel piece. And so that's just sort of how I build them. So this is like Gravity's Rainbow, but this is taking that same idea and sticking an end to end and flipping it on the side and sticking it end to end and making a symmetrical abstraction. And this is called Echo, Wow, and Flutter. And again, it's a sort of similar motif, but it's like Jasper John said, do something again. And and so this is me just trying to iterate, finding various iterations. This is a piece called Bird Blast. It's in the collection of MoMA. This I did on a Lazy Susan, and I just started from the center. Whoops, I don't have a detail, but started from, I do. Started from the center, and just very interested in this star shape made from the bird's tails, and then just filled every square inch I could with imagery, pills, and leaves. And so I should say that my brother, who isn't here, but I will see him tomorrow, I did his show in Santa Monica in the early 90s, and afterwards we went camping in the Devil's Punch Bowl area up by Lancaster. And he's like, he was a big birder at the time, and he was like, showed me pictures of his birds in his book, and he was like, tomorrow we're going to see western tanagers and pileated woodpeckers and this and that, and showed me pictures, gave me some binoculars, and then we were on the trail, and there was a western tanager, and I was like, holy shit, these things that have been dirt in the sky all my life, with enhanced optics and a little bit of knowledge, this whole parallel reality is opening up to me. And that really appealed to me in terms of, parallel realities, and were already something I was vibing with in my work. So I was like, cool. And with me, if it's a hobby, it's just a matter of time before it finds its way, worms its way into my work. And so birds became a really big thing. So, and also because I'm a working class guy, I'm a little on the frugal side. So I cut out these images of birds, put into Bird Blast, and I had these voids left over. So then I started putting them in these Gore-Tex and polar fleece outerwear, and kind of setting up this premise from across the room that you think you're looking at a field guide, and you get up close and you realize, something wrong with those birds. A lot of that kind of comes out of like some of the early light and space work that I saw here in in California. I know it doesn't look like it, but I remember when I walked into to see a Tourelle in Venice, and we it looked like a black rectangle painted on the wall in the Dimly-lit gallery, and me and my friends were like, stupid modern art. Oh my God, it's so stupid. And I went up to it and I touched it, and instead of me touching the surface, my hand went into limitless space. I was, oh wow. And it blew my mind, and this stupid thing became one of the greatest things I'd ever seen. So, and that premise of like setting the viewer up for a certain kind of visual expectation, and then maybe slightly gently pulling the rug out from under them, became something I was interested in, like that little sleight of hand. So anyway, that's that. And also, I guess, I'm maybe conflating ways that we process nature in our polar fleece outer garments made out of petrochemicals with our machine-made binoculars, looking at our field guides, which is what I was doing this morning, and at Trestles, and that was really cool. And so anyway, that all that stuff gets in there, plus notions in and around global warming and what made the world so weird that the birds had to wear those outfits. So anyway, a couple of those things, and that kind of dovetails with a few of these works over here that are pretty recent, and these compound bird's eyes. And what these are is I take these little tiny bird's eyes from field guides and I blow them really big, like, I don't know, like 10,000% on the computer. So that it's just pixelated field of color and dots. And so each one of these rings depicts an element of a bird eye in some field guide. And then but they start out very unfocused, and then they increasingly get more and more focused until the very center of it is the actual in-focus bird eye. And they're all different species, so I think of these as mixed flocks, if you will, of various birds. So just thought I'd throw that out there. So anyway, earlier I was talking about the ideology and how that is one of the things that we've imposed onto landscape. And you know, in my opinion, that's the history of America, is the imposition of ideology onto landscape. It's like we see this Edenic world, and we want to create it. We were here to create the New Jerusalem, and we were going to create this sort of biblical holy place, you know, kind of engineered by pilgrims. But the first thing they had to do was kill all the Indians, and the second thing they had to do was bring in all the slaves to clear all the land. And so landscape for me is never devoid of ideology. And so I wanted to, I was thinking about that in terms of my modern world. So this is a piece called New Jerusalem. And, you know, the outer area is sort of a Victoriana, you know, kind of floral, you know, decorative motif. But inside is this peaceful little, you know, mountain town, I guess, and with these little buildings. But inside, the buildings are the Branch Davidian compound, Charlie Manson's compound, the Aryan Nations compound, Shaker meeting houses, Mormon polygamist houses, the Drop City commune. So it's like everything from, like, you know, hippies to right-wing kooks, all living together in a town that isn't super harmonious. It's a town of fear and hate. I made this in 1996, okay? So it just, everything got more like that, in my opinion. But anyway, so yeah, this is all that. And so that's what I did. I was talking earlier about the severed body parts in these, in Gravity's Rainbow and in Echo on Flutter. A lot of that came out of the Tibetan tankas I'm really interested. I have a lifelong love affair with, and this is Yaga, and he's actually raping a guy to death. But it's a fucked up thing, but it's beautiful. And he has a necklace of severed human heads, and this is all about confrontating the ephemerality of life and moving on to the next dimension. And I don't know, it really speaks to me. I thought I would show it to you. But those Tibetan tankas, they're all about death. You know, I was, at the same time, I was like, you know, really involved with them. And I own a couple. I was listening a lot to the work of the Harry Smith Folk Anthology, kind of the text of the counterculture of America. And in it, you know, there's lots of hillbillies talking about, like, their children being, like, drowning in wells, and guys murdering their cheating spouses. It's weird old America. And you know, it's haunted by death, and, you know, this sort of Americana of, you know, of weirdness. And so I was also, you know, I just had a son, and I was, you know, he's grown up, getting vital, I'm shrinking, you know, and I started thinking very much about mortality. So I started doing these sort of Archambault-inspired images. This could almost be one of the settlers from New Jerusalem. So this is a guy, I don't know, let's see. Oh, yeah. So he's an amalgamation of various body parts in an Arcimboldo style way, and he's either being anointed by or being attacked by the bugs. I'll let you guys decide. But having worked on a ranch in Northern California for a summer, I can tell you it's probably attacked by. And then this is a piece called Expecting to Fly, which was sort of about my sort of punk rock past, about this sort of leap into the unknown, my love of Neil Young, and also relating back to Yves Klein and his leap, and this idea of the leap of faith that one has to take as an artist. I think that at a certain point, my work was all predicated up to around this point about doubt and what does paintings do, or what can art do, what's the function of art, and I think at a certain point I just had to accept that I had to make this stuff. I had to take a leap of faith, and that this wasn't necessarily an intellectual decision. It was something I just felt my way through. So anyway, there's this guy. I also turned him into a mural in La Jolla. So that was up, 10 years ago or something. It was really great. And so that was a great experience. And this is a portrait of my son and a portrait of my house at the time, which was outgassing junk from China. He's now grown up and he's wonderful. And then this is a piece called Airborne Event. And it started out as an all-over abstraction that was going to be based on the chemical analogs of LSD, but at a certain point, I was reading Don DeLillo's White Noise and about the airborne toxic event, and started thinking about the Assumption of Virgin Mary into heaven, and was kind of tied that in with alien space abduction. Next thing I knew, a woman was being captured by this chemical cloud, and that's how that happened. And there she is. And then at a certain point, the figures more or less left the work, and they were replaced in many ways by birds that are amalgamations of flowers, or often the things that they were eating. This is a hummingbird, sipping off the fruit of the vine. There's a kind of a close-up, and obviously I'm getting more and more, gratuitously decorative, and so what? And this is called Migrant Fruit Thugs. So I have this garden in Brooklyn, and one of the miracles out there is that I can actually grow figs. It can be done, and I guard the figs very jealously, and I'm constantly at war with the starlings. And one day I saw birds tearing up my figs. I went out there. I was really mad at the birds, and then I realized they were a rose-breasted grosbeak, a bird you rarely see in Brooklyn. And so I let them eat all the figs they wanted. It seemed like a visitation from another dimension. And so this work was more or less based on that. These are the actual fig leaves from my tree that I pressed into the surface of this wood panel, resined it over, and then painted it over the top of it. And I, in this case, I use these honey eaters from South America that I've never seen before, but maybe I will one day. But they felt that exotic to see that in Brooklyn. So anyway, at one point, text has always been a big part of my work, and this is a chemical celestial portrait of my wife Laura, and what it is it's based on a questionnaire where I asked the sitter for their birth date and to list every drug they can remember taking. So what the birth date does is it corresponds to an astrological sign that would then correspond to an astronomical location. Then I take all the drugs they can remember seeing. Then what I do is then I put pills and sugar on photographic paper and exposed it to light and made a photogram where basically a cameraless photograph. Developed it in a dark room, And so what you're looking at is the shadow of pills that were once on the piece. Then I relabeled those stars under this sign of Sagittarius, thereby rendering a portrait of the inner space and outer space of the sitter, a chemical celestial portrait. So that dovetails very much so with the photograms that are in the back room over there, which are done in a similar way, but with different intentionality. This was my 12 friends of the 12 houses of the zodiac. I should say that I don't actually believe in astrology, but I just thought it's a way of organizing information in a, I don't know, in a kind of a funny way. So anyway, oh yeah, and here's an example. In this case, now I'm continuing to work with photograms. Now what I'm doing is I'm just laying the leaves over one another on the photographic paper, and wherever a lot of leaves intersect, it creates white voids, and those white voids then became areas to put in color. So I call these blooms, and that I see them almost like still lifes, or like floral arrangements, and that you have the leaves that are there from laying them on the ground. The shadow of the real is there, but then these kind of colorful sort of flowers sort of come out of these negative voids. So anyway, in a lot of respects, this has a lot of the same kind of phenomenology that is in my resin paintings. It's photographic, it's a shadow of the real, and it's paint. So these are just some of the photograms that are in the space. You'll also notice that in the back gallery, there are these grids, and I put them in the show. What they are is just little grids that I painted, but then I perforated them, making them the same size and shape of blotter acid. And I was thinking about, I don't know, how during the whole grid mania of the 60s in the art world with Donald Judd and all the minimalists, there was this other grid going on that inside of psychedelic culture, and I have a real love of the outsider art inside of blotter acid art. I just actually curated a show a couple of years ago at Andrew Edlin Gallery at the Outsider Art Fair on psychedelic art, and it was really important for me to get a collection of real blotter acid to hang on the walls, and we didn't get busted. And it's also like stain painting. So it's like these two grids that were going on at the same time, but they never acknowledged one another. So it was my job as an artist to make that happen. So anyway, a lot of the work in the show is related to news of the day, and it all started in 2005 during the Bernie Evers scandal, WorldCom scandal. And I remember seeing this image in the New York Times, and I couldn't quite get over it. Like, he's such a reprehensible person. He destroyed a company that, and tens of thousands of people were probably unemployed because of him. He was a crook. But I also was like, there was also some humanity. Like, this man is like suffering, and his wife is clutching him, but I don't know who she is or what part she had to play in it. And so I was like a little discombobulated. Like, I hated him on one hand, but I had some sort of sympathy as a human on another. And then I realized it kind of reminded me of Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden. This is a work I cribbed from Masaccio for a 2000 painting. This is a piece called Expulsion. So then what I did was I started painting all over them. And then this is the first blotter acid I ever made. And Pasternak from Creative Time is now the head of the director of the Brooklyn Art Museum, said, can you do a benefit print for us? And I was like, you know what, Ann, I would. And I would like to get, can we do some blotter acid? And to Ann's credit, she said, yes. We found a guy who makes acid in Boston. He perfed up the sheets. We printed them up, and Ann sold acid. It's not soaked. It's completely legal. But and apparently, according to a recently published book on the history of blotter acid, This is the very first piece to ever incorporate LSD as an idea inside bladder acid inside a work of art. So I don't know. That's what the experts say. And so then here we go with it's just Adam and Eve, and them, being expelled. He's being expelled from Wall Street. The paparazzi, the camera-wielding paparazzi of the media is pushing him out of I don't know. It just seemed really apropos. So this is another thing that I have in my studio. I've collected every New York Times now front page in my studio since 2005. And it is obviously my relationship to the news is really indebted to Andy Warhol. So he's one of the major influences in my particular room, and I want to acknowledge that. For years, I was very nervous about making them bigger than they were in real life, and for the most part, I've stayed inside the exact one-to-one relationship. But a couple of pieces, a few works, I've gone really big, and so there's a couple here. And I felt like I was able to get out from Andy Warhol. I can tell you all about that later if you want, privately. And the other artist I think that was I'm really indebted to is Miro. And insofar as these celestial drawings that he did were done they're cosmic, they're beautiful. They're also done in the height of World War II while Europe was burning. And to me, he's not screaming politics from the mountaintop. He's just saying that, to me, that the world may be going to hell, but art's still worth making, and beauty is still worth looking at. And so I got a lot out of looking at Miro and knowing what time these drawings were made. And so that and Warhol and artists like Sarah Charlesworth, we can go on and on, have been really instrumental in kind of directing me towards this particular endeavor. So I did those for many, many years, and then I quit. I was like, I'm done with that, I'm moving on. And I was rolling along in my studio, had a show coming up. May of 2020 was when it was supposed to open. And then March of, March 12th, everything shut down. My studio assistant fled to Vermont. I was stuck in my studio, in my house. I couldn't go to my studio. My work's too heavy to move by myself. So I set up a little bedroom, and I started making these COVID drawings. And so that every day the new calamity would come into, I'm thrown on my front doorstep. And then I could simultaneously sort of drill into the horror of the events as they were unfolding, and then lose myself in the process of making art. So there's constantly flipping back and forth between losing myself and drilling in, losing myself and drilling in. And then in the process, also kind of tripping around the house, working in the garden, fixing the garbage disposal, just sort of living in the house and just rotating upstairs, making more of these things. And I made a whole bunch. And each one, what I like about the New York Times works for me is, first of all, I don't think of them as overtly political. Obviously, I have beliefs and they are embedded in the work I do. But, I try to keep them ambiguous. And I try to work with what's there, and I try to let the day's events sort of, and the context and the image sort of jar me and sort of push me into directions that maybe are a little outside my comfort zone. This is a map of COVID death hotspots in the United States along the eastern seaboard. And I sort of turned it into a kind of cosmic Hilma af Klint style abstraction. And the one thing I did change up on this is that I changed the scale to always make the image as big as possible to make the image the primary thing that one sees. But this image, no matter how beautiful or cosmic or terrible it is, it's always bracketed by the information of the day. So it's always the headlines, the captions are always reminding you that there's another thing happening. So I'll just go, this is like a little trip through COVID. You have Black Lives Matter. The world was convulsing, and I was just sort of processing, and just tripping out. So some of the stuff isn't here, but there. This is in the collection of Orange County Museum, so I just thought I'd throw that out there as this, and some of the work from the show. And let me see here. So sometimes the work, like this work here, was about it was actually, it wasn't a headline image, but it was like a below the fold image about how monarch butterfly migration was in serious peril in California. And I sort of put it up with this like pressure on Trump, millions kept at home, this idea, and it just seemed there was some poetic resonance. But then I tried to make a painting out of it, and I came up with that. So actually underneath that painting is all the New York Times information, all this stuff here and here is there. But at a certain point, I didn't think like it needed it anymore. So I extended the top and I extended the bottom. The bottom part is actually where the lower part was. I turned that into a field of daisies and grass. And then the upper part is just more butterflies. So you can see there's a relationship between what's going on here and what's going on there. And so the last thing I think I'll probably get to is once I gave up working with the Times, as paper, I started incorporating the buzz of the media into these works. Many of these newer works and that you're seeing here on the walls involve like bits of text from the media of the calamity of the day's events that are sort of like woven into the surfaces of these works. And I tend to feel like that's sort of like how my life is. I'm a very lucky person. I'm a full-time artist. I get to go to my studio every day and do what I want and listen to music or whatever. But there's this, so I'm in this perfect, kind of idealized envelope of the studio, acting out in pure freedom and pleasure and struggle. It's not always fun, but also the calamity of the day is constantly bombarding my studio like cannonballs. There's like, Israel's on fire, the world's on fire, Trump's on fire, everything's on fire. And so the calamity is like, that's our lives. Our lives are, we are alive, we're grateful I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be an artist. I'm grateful to have my sensory apparatuses to see all this. But it's also this other thing is happening simultaneously, this suffering. And so I just wanted to sort of worm it into the work, to have it be the buzz that there's always that background buzz. No matter how beautiful things are, there's this other thing happening somewhere else. So I wanted to sort of incorporate that because I am interested in beauty, but I'm also interested in a kind of truth. This work here, and that work there, that with the blue brain flower smoke, that's actually the bottom information there, FYI, for you guys. That's from Santiago Creek, a creek next to my house in Santa Ana that I grew up playing in. And in this case, it's on fire, as is that piece over there. And let me see. So I'll just show you some things. And let's see. Oh, yeah. Bird strike. This is about, birds migrating into my backyard, smashing into my windows, and me trying to make sure the cats don't eat them and get them back on their feet. So there's that. There's that I showed you. And I'm just going to go through. I think this might be the last slide. I'm now taking the text out. The newest thing is Irwin's Garden is probably close to the last piece, or maybe that one, Field Energy Migration, but they're the two last pieces that I worked on. I think maybe I'm taking the text out, I'm not sure. That piece over there in the back, was based on going up to Getty Center last summer, right after that, remember that tropical storm that came and dumped a bunch of rain in August, and everybody's freaking out and don't drive and whatever. And so I went up to Getty to see Bob Irwin's garden. I hadn't seen it in like 25 years. And I had the great opportunity to meet him through Linda Forsha, thank you very much. And it was one of the great, privileges of my life to meet this incredibly fantastic, totally with it artist. It was such a huge influence on me. So I saw his garden, I knew he was sick, and I took photographs of his garden, and I went back to my studio in Brooklyn, and he loved dahlias, I was growing dahlias. I hybridized his garden and my garden into this work. And I actually, at one point, I knew he was sick in the hospital. I wanted to finish it and send it to him, but he unfortunately passed away. But anyway, this is my homage to Robert Irwin. As you can see, there's a lot of homages to a lot of artists. We don't come from anywhere. We are all part of an influence, a large collective influence of various wonderful people that come into our lives, and he was one of them. And let me see, I think that's the end. So anyway, thank you for coming.
Tell us a little bit about that piece that's just vibrating off the wall.
I was reading about how birds use, they have crystals in their brains that orient themselves to magnetic polarities, and that they use magnetic resonance or invisible magnetic resonance in order to orient themselves through time and space. And I was listening, I have these friends that are at this band, the Magnetic Fields, which I really love, and I've actually done album covers for, and I was listening to them, and I was doing these bird's eyes collages, and so I was sort of thinking simultaneously about that, about birds migrating through space using magnetic resonance, but I was also interested in chakras and the sort of the stacking up of chakras that one would see in the Kabbalistic drawings of Harry Smith from the 50s, and then inside of all that, if you look at it, is if you pardon the expression, a shitstorm of bad news that's sort of emanating. So it sort of encapsulates, I think, the ideas I was talking about of, a kind of cosmic, almost magical phenomenology of nature and the world, and this other thing that's happening simultaneously. So I was trying to get two very opposite things locked together into the same work.
Yeah, I mean, this piece almost has an encapsulation of everything in it.
Yeah.
It's
It's all there.
It's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you another question about birds. So there's a lot of birds, and we've been spending the last almost 2 years talking about birds. You saw some today. Tell us about your bird discovery
I went out with Cheryl Kiddo and over at Trestles today, and saw an insane amount of birds. As a matter of fact, I was late coming here because I was so enamored. But I did get a new lifer. I got a snowy plover, and I've never seen one before. And I also saw, second time I've ever seen, California gnatcatcher, which is really super rare. They only live here and maybe in Baja. And I think they're responsible. The California gnatcatcher is actually responsible for a lot of natural coastline here. So they've stopped it, a lot of development because of the California gnatcatcher. So he's our friend. They are our friends. And I also saw California thrasher, which I hardly ever see. And I don't know, 50 other birds. It was really cool. And plus the best surf break in probably the whole West Coast is at Trestles. Yeah. And I was very envious about all these awesome waves that I wasn't getting into. But, maybe another trip.
Yeah, another trip.
Yeah, that was great.
And can you tell us about the birds that are going to be in your mosaic project? Because this is also new to work in mosaic.
I'm bringing above ground, below ground. So I'm taking some of the endemic year-round birds that are that one can see in the parks of New York City. It'd be the northern cardinal, peregrine falcon, and red-bellied woodpecker, and they're just around all the time. And like we have cardinals in our backyard all the time. They're pretty awesome. And then weather patterns, dahlias, so there's flowers, there's sky, there's an owl that's my homage to both either Flacco or Barry, the two celebrity owls of New York, if you will. And so I'm bringing them downtown, and I'm actually legally not allowed to show you images until the piece is finished. So I'm not even allowed to talk about it, but it's between us. It'll be finished by the end of October. Where I've been working on it in Germany for a number of years, and with Meyer. And some of these are quite large. They're glass mosaic. We've devised new methodologies that have never been done in the history of glass mosaic. And I think it's going to be a really great piece. So I'm really super jazzed. I mean, I'm not jazzed to leave New York. I mean, to leave Laguna Beach, because I'm really liking it here. But I got to get there and install that. So they're unpacking the crates as we speak. And I'll be installing it starting on Thursday, and hopefully have it finished by November 1st.
Yep. So one last question, then I'm going to open it up. Fred, you obviously work as a collagist. There's lots of things from here and there and everywhere, and it brought into the pieces both in terms of theme and in terms of approach. So I also know that you have one piece in here, these three little pieces that have no assemblage of parts. What's it like to not be putting the stuff on the surface?
Are you talking about the blotter acid pieces? Yeah, those are weird things. I just thought I would throw them out there. I mean, they're not just pigment, because I did use a perforation tool to take it to another place. So in a weird way, I don't know if it's not collage, because I'm adding a little, I don't know. I can't do a straight painting. I'm just not good enough. But one day I will, but not yet.
Okay. We'll wait for that. We'll show it here at the Laguna Art Museum, Fred's first real painting. But in the meantime, we have all these incredible paintings. But thank you, all of you, for coming here and being part of this conversation and being part of this show today, the opening day. And I hope you enjoy it. It's on until early February. And take a look at everything that you just heard about in reality right in front of you. So thank you.
Thanks for coming.